A humble woman, used to the solitude of the desert and the simplicity of her life among sand and stars, sees her fate change when she finds a badly injured man beneath the scorching sun, unaware she has just saved the future pharaoh of Upper Egypt, who was fleeing a destiny imposed by temple and crown. She takes him in and heals his wounds with ancestral wisdom, never imagining that by doing so, she would become the center of a scandal that would shake the palace walls. What seemed like a fleeting encounter between two strangers turns into something far deeper, defying the gods, duty, and the weight of a crown. The merciless sun hung like a golden eye in the cloudless sky, bearing down on the vast expanse of sand that stretched endlessly in every direction. Heat waves shimmered above the dunes, creating illusions that danced and disappeared with each blink. It was in this unforgiving landscape that Nayet moved with practiced ease, her slender figure wrapped in layers of lightweight fabric that protected her skin from the burning rays while allowing the occasional desert breeze to cool her. "Just a little further," she murmured to herself, adjusting the strap of her medicine pouch. The familiar weight against her hip provided comfort in the desolate terrain. Nayet had ventured farther than usual from her nomadic settlement to gather rare desert herbs that only bloomed after the season's first rainfall. The elders depended on her knowledge of healing, a gift passed down through generations of women in her family. As she crested a particularly steep dune, something unusual caught her eye, a dark shape disrupting the perfect waves of sand below. Nayet squinted, shielding her eyes with a weathered hand. Her heart quickened. Not something, someone. "Spirits preserve us," she whispered, abandoning caution as she hastened down the slope, half sliding through the loose sand. As she approached, the figure took shape. A man lying face down, his rich garments caked with blood and sand. His ornate dagger had fallen just beyond his outstretched hand, its jeweled hilt glinting accusingly in the sunlight. Nayet hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside him. Years of treating the sick and wounded had taught her to push aside fear in favor of action. With gentle hands, she rolled him onto his back, gasping softly at what she saw. Even covered in grime and blood, his face held a nobility she had never encountered in her humble settlement. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and full lips currently cracked from dehydration, all framed by close-cropped dark hair that must have been recently shorn, unusual for men of the desert. "Can you hear me?" she asked, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. A pulse fluttered weakly beneath her touch. "The gods have spared you so far, stranger," she murmured, "though they've certainly tested your strength." Working quickly, Nayet uncorked her water skin and moistened his lips. When he didn't respond, she dripped small amounts between them, careful not to choke him. After assessing his injuries, a deep gash across his ribs, numerous cuts and bruises, and what appeared to be an arrow wound in his shoulder, she knew he wouldn't survive much longer under the desert sun. "You picked quite a spot to take a rest," she said, talking to fill the silence as she tore strips from her undergarment to bind his worst wounds. "Miles from anywhere, with not even a scorpion to keep you company." Making a decision that would forever alter the course of her life, Nayet began constructing a simple travois from the sturdy branches she'd collected for her herb basket. It wouldn't be comfortable for him, but it might keep him alive until they reached her tent. As she worked, the man's eyelids fluttered. For a brief moment his eyes opened, dark as midnight and filled with a confusion that quickly gave way to alarm. He tried to sit up, a hoarse cry escaping his lips. "Be still," Nayet commanded, pressing him gently back. "You'll reopen your wounds." "Where?" His voice was barely audible, rough from thirst and exhaustion. "You're in the western dunes," she answered, offering more water. "A 3-hour journey from my settlement. I'm Nayet, a healer." He seemed to process this information slowly, eyes darting around as if expecting to see someone emerging from behind the dunes. "They mustn't find me," he whispered urgently, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No one will find you where I'm taking you," she assured him, though curiosity burned within her. Who was this man, dressed in fabrics finer than any she'd seen, carrying a weapon fit for nobility? And who was he running from? She helped him onto the travois, noticing how he bit his lip to keep from crying out in pain. "My people say that those found in the desert are brought by the winds of fate," she told him, as she began the laborious task of pulling the makeshift sled across the sand. The desert gives nothing without purpose. The journey back was arduously slow. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering words in a dialect Nayet recognized as belonging to the great city of Thebes, hundreds of miles to the north. By the time the cluster of tents that formed her settlement came into view, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. Nayet bypassed the main gathering area, pulling the travois directly to her dwelling at the edge of the settlement. She had no way of knowing that the man she dragged behind her, this stranger who had collapsed in the vastness of the desert, was Amenheru, Prince Pharaoh, and heir to the throne of Upper Egypt. Nor could she have guessed that in saving his life, she had inserted herself into a political and religious crisis that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of the kingdom. "Almost there," she said to him, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "Just hold on a little longer." As Nayet ducked into her tent, pulling the wounded prince after her, she felt a peculiar sensation, as if invisible threads were being woven around them both, binding their fates together in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. Something significant had begun in the moment she'd spotted his form upon the sand, something that would reach far beyond her simple life as a nomadic healer. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to the convergence of two worlds that were never meant to intersect. Inside her tent, Nayet prepared her herbs and medicines, unaware that the act of mercy she had performed that day would soon challenge everything she thought she knew about destiny, duty, and the unexpected pathways of the heart. In the hazy realm between consciousness and dreams, Amenheru found himself once again standing in the great hall of Thebes. The massive columns stretched toward the heavens, painted in vibrant blues and golds that celebrated the glory of the gods. But rather than comfort, these familiar surroundings brought only a sense of suffocation. "You will marry Neferet before the next full moon," his father's voice echoed in his memory. Not a request, but a command etched in stone like the hieroglyphs adorning the palace walls. "The alliance with the temple of Amun cannot be delayed any longer." Amenheru's fists had clenched at his sides, the weight of the royal signet ring suddenly unbearable on his finger. "Father, I have served as your general, led our armies to victory against the Hittites. I have proven my loyalty to the crown 1,000 times over. Must I also sacrifice my heart?" The pharaoh's eyes had hardened, lines of disappointment etching deeper into his aging face. "A pharaoh's heart belongs to Egypt, not to himself. You've known this since childhood." The memory shifted, and Amenheru found himself in the temple courtyard, facing the calculating gaze of sumo priest Amenhotep. Beside him stood Neferet, beautiful and cold as polished marble, her eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. "My daughter will make a fitting queen," Amenhotep had said, his jeweled hands resting possessively on Neferet's shoulder. "She has been raised to understand the delicate balance between the throne and the temple. With her at your side, the gods will smile upon your reign." What the priest didn't say, what everyone in the royal court knew, was that with Neferet as queen, the temple's influence would grow, extending its reach further into matters of state. Amenheru would be pharaoh in name, while Amenhotep pulled the strings from behind the curtain of religious authority. A sudden pain jolted Amenheru from his memories. He opened his eyes to find himself not in the grand palace of Thebes, but in a simple tent, the smell of unfamiliar herbs heavy in the air. For a moment, disorientation claimed him. Then reality came crashing back, his desperate escape, the ambush in the desert, the woman who had saved him. "You're awake," a gentle voice said. The healer, Nayet, she'd called herself, knelt beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "Your fever broke during the night." Amenheru tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his side. "How long have I been here?" 3 days, she answered, easing him back down onto the pallet. "You've been drifting in and out, speaking in your sleep." Her eyes, dark and perceptive, studied him. "You mentioned Thebes often, and someone named Neferet." He turned his face away, unable to meet her gaze. How much had he revealed in his delirium? How much did this desert woman know? "Rest now," Nayet said, seeming to sense his discomfort. "Whatever demons chase you, they cannot find you here." If only that were true, Amenheru thought bitterly. His decision to flee had not been made lightly. After his father's unexpected death, so sudden that whispers of poison had spread through the palace like wildfire, Amenheru had found himself thrust into a position he'd been prepared for all his life, yet felt utterly unready to assume. The pressure to marry Neferet had intensified. The priests insisted the coronation could not proceed without a queen at his side, a queen of their choosing, naturally. The final straw had come the night before his planned escape. He'd overheard Amenhotep speaking with his inner circle. their voices low but clear in the temple's echoing chambers. "Once the marriage is complete, we must move quickly," the priest had said. "Amenheru has his father's stubborn streak. If he consolidates power before we can establish our influence, all our planning will be for naught." Another voice, one Amenheru recognized as belonging to Menkaura, Amenhotep's most trusted advisor, had responded, "The potion can be administered gradually. By the time the court realizes the pharaoh's mind is compromised, it will be too late. Neferet will rule as regent, guided by your wisdom, of course." The revelation had struck Amenheru like a physical blow. Not only did they plan to control him through marriage, but they intended to poison his mind, turning him into a puppet king while they ruled through his wife. That night, he had made his decision. Taking only what he could carry, a few jewels, his ceremonial dagger and the royal seal, he had slipped away under cover of darkness. His plan had been to reach the distant oasis of Siwa, where he could gather supporters loyal to the crown rather than the temple. But his journey had been cut short by Amenhotep's men, who had tracked him into the desert. The battle had been fierce but brief. Outnumbered, Amenheru had fought with the skill that had made him a feared general, but an arrow to his shoulder had eventually brought him down. His last memory before losing consciousness had been of dragging himself among the dunes, determined to die a free man, rather than return as a prisoner. "You should eat something." Nayet's voice pulled him back to the present. She offered a wooden bowl containing a thin porridge. "It's not palace fare, but it will help you regain your strength." Amenheru accepted the bowl, their fingers brushing momentarily. "How did you know I'm from a palace?" Nayet smiled slightly. "Your hands. They're strong but uncalloused. Your skin is smooth despite your injuries, and the fabric of your garments, though ruined now, was once fine enough for royalty." She paused. "But mostly it's the way you carry yourself, even injured, like a man accustomed to being obeyed." Amenheru couldn't help but feel exposed under her perceptive gaze. In the palace, he was surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His favor, his power, his position. This woman had saved his life, expecting nothing in return, yet she seemed to see through the walls he'd built around himself with ease. "My name is Amenheru," he said finally, offering a truth without revealing its full weight. "Amenheru," she repeated, the name flowing from her lips like water. "Rest now, Amenheru of Thebes. Tomorrow, we can speak more." As darkness fell and the sounds of the nomadic camp settled into the rhythms of night, Amenheru lay awake, his mind racing. In Thebes, his absence would have been discovered by now. The priests would be in an uproar, the court in chaos. Without him, the coronation could not proceed. Without a pharaoh, Egypt stood vulnerable. Part of him felt shame for abandoning his duty. Generations of his ancestors had ruled with honor, putting Egypt's needs above their own. But another part, a part that had grown stronger since his father's death, rebelled against becoming a pawn in the priest's game. Outside the tent, the vast desert stretched under a canopy of stars. Amenheru had always found comfort in the night sky. The same stars looked down on all of Egypt, connecting him to every corner of his kingdom. Now they seemed to offer something else, the possibility of a different path, one not laid out by tradition and expectation. As sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was not of Thebes or the throne, or even the scheming priests. Instead, it was of a pair of dark eyes, honest and direct, belonging to a woman who had pulled him from the sands when he had all but surrendered to death. A woman who had asked nothing of him but his name. For the first time since his father's death, Amenheru slept without dreams of duty and betrayal haunting his rest. Dawn broke over the desert settlement, painting the sky in delicate hues of pink and gold. Nayet had been awake for hours, grinding dried herbs into fine powder with a stone mortar and pestle that had belonged to her grandmother. The rhythmic motion was meditative, allowing her thoughts to settle like sand after a storm. "You're up early," came a voice from the corner of her tent. Amenheru was propped up on one elbow, watching her with those penetrating dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets as vast as the desert itself. "The morning hours are when the healing herbs are most potent," Nayet replied, not looking up from her work. "How are your wounds feeling today?" It had been nearly a week since she'd found him half dead among the dunes. Each day, his strength returned a little more. Though the arrow wound in his shoulder would need more time to heal completely, the man was remarkably resilient, another sign that he was no ordinary traveler. "Better," Amenheru said, testing his shoulder with a slight wince. "Your medicine works wonders." In the palace, he stopped abruptly as if catching himself. Nayet glanced up, meeting his gaze. In the palace, They have different methods. A shadow passed over his face. Less effective ones, despite their claims of divine inspiration. She nodded, returning to her grinding. The gods speak to those who listen, not just to those who build them temples. The comment hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. Nayet had been careful not to press him about his past, though her curiosity burned like embers in her chest. Who exactly was this man? Why was he running? And why did his presence in her humble tent feel so significant? My father used to say that, Amenheru said after a long moment of silence, that the gods speak to those who listen. There was a wistfulness in his voice that tugged at something deep within Nayet's heart. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. The past tense wasn't lost on her. Though not everyone shared that opinion, putting aside her mortar, Nayet moved to kneel beside her patient. I need to change your bandages. It wasn't a request, but she waited for his nod before carefully unwrapping the linen strips from his torso. The wound was healing well, the angry red fading to a more promising pink. Her fingers worked methodically, cleansing the area with a solution of herbs and honey. She was acutely aware of his eyes on her, studying her movements with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You have a gift, he said softly. Your hands, they seem to know exactly what to do. My mother taught me, and her mother before her. Nayet reached for a fresh poultice, the scent of medicinal herbs filling the air between them. In my family, healing is passed down through the women, like a precious heirloom. No husband to interfere with your practice? The question was casual, but Nayet sensed a deeper curiosity behind it. No husband, she confirmed, pressing the poultice gently against his wound. My calling to heal comes first. The men in our settlement understand that, but not all men would. Their eyes met, and for a moment something electric passed between them, a current of understanding that needed no words. Nayet looked away first, busying herself with securing the bandage. You should try to stand today, she said, changing the subject. A short walk around the tent, perhaps. The body heals faster when it moves. Amenheru nodded, but made no immediate move to rise. Instead, he reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against her wrist where her sleeve had fallen back. Thank you, he said, his voice low and sincere, for my life. The touch sent a shiver up her arm that had nothing to do with the morning chill. I did what anyone would do, she replied, withdrawing her hand perhaps too quickly. No, he said, shaking his head. Not anyone. You ventured far from safety to find herbs. You dragged a stranger back to your home. You've shared your food, your medicine, your space. His eyes held hers, unwavering. Most would have left me to the mercy of the desert. Nayet stood, needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. Perhaps the desert showed you mercy by guiding you to my path. Outside, the sounds of the settlement coming to life filtered through the tent walls. Children's laughter, women calling to one another, the bleating of goats. Normal sounds that suddenly seemed a world away from the charged atmosphere within her dwelling. I'll bring you some breakfast, she said, moving toward the tent flap. Then we can try that walk. Throughout the day, Nayet found herself watching Amenheru with a mixture of caution and fascination. He moved differently from the men of her settlement, with a grace that spoke of formal training, perhaps as a warrior or dancer. When he spoke, his words were carefully chosen, revealing education beyond what was common even among the wealthier desert traders. As the days passed, their routine settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for healing, changing bandages, administering potions, gentle exercises to strengthen his injured shoulder. Afternoons often found them in conversation, sometimes about the desert and its harsh beauty, sometimes about philosophy or the nature of the gods. Nayet was careful never to ask directly about his past or his destination, and Amenheru seemed equally careful not to reveal too much. Yet with each passing day, small details emerged. His knowledge of star patterns used by royal astronomers, his familiarity with court protocols, his understanding of military strategy. One evening, as they sat outside her tent watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of orange and crimson, Amenheru spoke of his childhood. I wasn't always meant for the life I led before, he said, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. My older brother was the one being groomed for greater things. I was free to explore, to learn, to question. What happened to your brother? Nayet asked gently, sensing the pain behind his words. Amenheru's face tightened. Fever took him when I was 12. Suddenly my path was no longer my own. Nayet understood loss all too well, Her own parents had been claimed by the same sandstorm when she was just 16, leaving her to carry on their legacy of healing. "The gods often lead us down unexpected paths," she said. "Sometimes the journey makes no sense until we look back and see how far we've come. And sometimes," he replied, his eyes finding hers in the fading light, "the journey brings us to places we never knew we were seeking." The moment hung between them, fragile as a desert bloom. Then, from the center of the settlement, came the sound of drums, the beginning of the evening storytelling circle. "Come," Nayat said, standing and offering her hand without thinking. "You're strong enough to join the others tonight. Our elder Jabari tells tales that can make even the stars stop to listen." Amenheru hesitated, then took her hand, allowing her to help him to his feet. His palm was warm against hers, the touch sending that now familiar current through her veins. At the gathering they sat slightly apart from the others, Amenheru's face partially shadowed by his hood. Nayat was acutely conscious of his presence beside her, of the slight brush of his arm against hers when he shifted position, of the way his eyes reflected the firelight. Jabari's tale that night was an ancient one, the story of a desert spirit who fell in love with a mortal woman, crossing boundaries that should never be crossed. As the old man's voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the story, Nayat found herself unable to look at Amenheru, afraid of what she might see reflected in his eyes, or what he might see in hers. Later, as they walked back to her tent under a sky ablaze with stars, a comfortable silence enveloped them. It was Amenheru who finally broke it. "Your people have a rich tradition," he said. "There's a wisdom in their stories that many in the great cities have forgotten." "We need our stories," Nayat replied. "The desert teaches us that nothing is permanent, not water, not shelter, not life itself, but stories endure, passed from one generation to the next, like seeds that bloom after the rains." They reached her tent, and for a moment, neither moved to enter. Standing face to face under the vast desert sky, Nayat felt something shift between them, a boundary becoming permeable, a distance closing. "Nayat," Amenheru said softly, her name a caress on his lips. Before he could continue, a shout rang out from the edge of the settlement. One of the lookouts had spotted riders approaching from the north. Unusual at this hour, the spell broken, Nayat quickly ushered Amenheru inside her tent. "Stay here," she instructed, her voice suddenly tense. "No one must see you." As she hurried toward the commotion, Nayat's mind raced with possibilities. Who would be traveling through the desert at night? What could be so urgent? Deep in her heart she already knew the answer, though she couldn't bear to acknowledge it. The outside world had found them at last, and with it, the reality that Amenheru did not belong in her simple life among the dunes. Whatever connection had been growing between them, this fragile, unnamed thing, now faced its first true test. And Nayat, who had always prided herself on her practical nature, found herself praying to the desert gods for more time, just a little more time, before the winds of fate blew them in different directions. The riders had departed by morning, leaving behind a cloud of unease that hung over the settlement like a gathering storm. Nayat stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon where dust still lingered from their horses. "Palace guards," she murmured to herself, remembering the emblems emblazoned on their shields, the sacred falcon of Upper Egypt. Searching this far from the Nile Valley, her heart hammered against her ribs as she made her way back to her tent, careful to keep her expression neutral. The settlement was small, eyes were everywhere, curiosity as natural as breathing among people who lived in such close proximity. Inside, Amenheru sat cross-legged on his pallet, tension evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. "They're looking for me," he said. Not a question. "Yes." Nayat sealed the tent flap before continuing. "They questioned Jabari about strangers passing through, said they seek a criminal who stole from the temple treasury." She studied his face carefully. "Is that true?" Amenheru's jaw tightened. "Is that what they're claiming now, that I'm a thief?" The bitter laugh that escaped him held no humor, only a deep weariness that seemed to age him before her eyes. For a moment, Nayat glimpsed the weight he carried, heavier than any physical burden she'd ever witnessed. "What I took was mine by right," he said finally, meeting her gaze with unflinching directness. "Given to me by my father, entrusted to my care, not theirs to control." Nayat knelt beside him, lowering her voice though there was no one to overhear. "These men aren't just temple guards, are they? Their armor bears the royal insignia." Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "No," he admitted at last, "not just temple guards. Before he could elaborate, a soft call came from outside. "Nayet, are you within?" She recognized the voice of Sati, one of the elder's wives. Rising quickly, she whispered to Amenheru, "Stay silent. Don't move." Stepping outside, Nayet arranged her features into a welcoming smile. "Good morning, Sati. What brings you by so early?" The older woman, her face weathered by years under the desert sun, held out a bundle wrapped in linen. "Bread and dates for your patient. The riders who passed through left us uneasy, especially after asking so many questions." Her sharp eyes flickered to the tent. Jabari told them nothing, of course. "We protect our own." Nayet accepted the offering with genuine gratitude, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, my patient is recovering well." "And yet you haven't brought him to the communal fire," Sati observed. 2 weeks he's been in your care, seen only by you." The gentle probing didn't surprise Nayet. Desert people survived by being observant. "His injuries were severe," she explained, "and he values his privacy. Some men find weakness difficult to bear before others." Sati nodded, though her eyes remained keen. "The settlement has noticed. There is talk." Of course there was. A single woman housing a mysterious stranger for weeks would naturally spark conversation. Nayet had been so focused on healing Amenheru, on the danger pursuing him, that she'd neglected to consider how their situation appeared to others. "He will be gone soon," Nayet said, the words catching slightly in her throat. "Once he's strong enough to travel." Sati reached out, patting Nayet's cheek in a maternal gesture. "Just be careful, child. The heart sometimes sees what the eyes cannot." With that cryptic warning, the older woman departed, leaving Nayet standing with the food bundle, her cheeks warm despite the morning chill. Inside the tent, Amenheru had risen to his feet. "They suspect something," he said. "They suspect I've developed feelings for my patient," Nayet corrected him, setting down the food more forcefully than necessary, which is a far less dangerous suspicion than the truth. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Nayet looked away first, busying herself with unwrapping the bread. "Those riders will return," Amenheru said, "or others will come. I've put your entire settlement at risk by staying. You are in no condition to travel." She broke the bread into pieces, her movements sharp. "And you still aren't fully healed?" "Nayet." His voice softened, and she felt him step closer. "My presence here endangers everyone, especially you." She turned to face him, suddenly angry, though she couldn't entirely explain why. "And where would you go? Back to whatever you're running from? Or further into the desert to die alone on the sand where no one will find you this time?" The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. Amenheru reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The simple touch sent a cascade of sensations through her body. "I never meant to bring danger to your door," he said quietly, "or to make you care what becomes of me." Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the perimeter of the settlement. Nayet rushed to the tent flap, peering out cautiously. Her blood turned to ice at what she saw. A larger contingent of soldiers had arrived, their armor glinting in the morning sun. At their head rode a figure dressed not in military garb, but in the elaborate robes of the priesthood, his bald head gleaming, golden pectoral catching the light with each movement of his mount. "A priest of Amun," Amenheru whispered from behind her, having moved silently to her side. His face had drained of color. Menkara. Nayet felt her world tilting on its axis. The name was familiar. Amenheru had mentioned it during his fever dreams, always with an undercurrent of dread. "Who is he?" "The sumo priest's right hand, his most trusted advisor." Amenheru's voice was flat, controlled. "And the man who would have overseen my slow poisoning had I remained in Thebes." Nayet's mind raced. The tent offered no real protection. A thorough search would reveal Amenheru in moments. They needed a better hiding place, and quickly. "The storage caves," she decided, already gathering essentials: water, bandages, a knife. "Beyond the oasis, we can—" "No." Amenheru's hand on her arm stopped her frantic movements. "I'll go alone." "Don't be absurd. You don't know the desert as I do. And you don't know Menkara as I do." His eyes bore into hers, intense and unwavering. "He isn't here to arrest me, Nayet. He's here to eliminate a threat. Anyone helping me will meet the same fate." Outside, the commotion grew as the soldiers dismounted. Orders were being shouted. Tents approached. "There's no time to argue," Nayet said, her decision made. She grabbed a bundle of her plainest garments. "Put these on quickly and smear this on your face." She handed him a pot of dark ointment she used for treating burns. "Pull the hood low. As Amenheru changed, she took a deep breath, steadying herself for what must come next. When a sharp voice called her name from outside, she was ready. "Coming!" she called, then turned to Amenheru, now disguised as a simple desert dweller. "Follow my lead. Say nothing. Keep your head down. You're mute from birth. My cousin from the southern tribes, helping with my healing work." She didn't wait for his agreement before stepping outside, schooling her features into a mask of confusion and mild concern. The priest Menkara stood before her tent, flanked by guards. Up close he was even more imposing, tall and austere, with eyes like chips of obsidian set in a face that seemed carved from stone. His gaze swept over her with cold calculation. "Healer," he addressed her, not bothering with her name, though she was certain he knew it. "Your settlement harbors a fugitive, a dangerous man who has betrayed the crown and the gods themselves." Nayat bowed her head, the picture of deference. "Great One, we are simple desert folk. No strangers have passed through our settlement in many moons, save for traders known to us." "You lie." The accusation cracked like a whip. "Our sources tracked him to this region. Soldiers reported a healer treating a wounded man matching his description." "Many seek my medicines," Nayat replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her belly. "But none who fits the description of a royal fugitive." Menkara's eyes narrowed. "Search her tent," he commanded the guards, "and bring out anyone inside." Heart pounding, Nayat stepped aside as two soldiers pushed past her. A moment later they emerged with Amenheru, his face darkened by the ointment, head bowed submissively. "Who is this?" Menkara demanded. "My cousin," Nayat answered smoothly. "From the southern tribes. He cannot speak, born without a voice. He assists with gathering herbs and preparing medicines." The priest studied Amenheru, who kept his eyes downcast, shoulders hunched to disguise his height and bearing. The scrutiny seemed to last an eternity, each heartbeat thundering in Nayat's ears. Finally, Menkara turned away, dismissing them as unimportant. "Search the entire settlement," he ordered his men. "Every tent, every storage pot, every bundle of possessions. He cannot have gone far." As the soldiers dispersed, the priest's cold gaze returned to Nayat. "If I discover you've lied to me, woman, your punishment will be severe. The gods do not look kindly upon those who shelter enemies of Egypt." "I serve the gods through my healing," Nayat replied, a thread of defiance weaving through her carefully maintained composure. "They see all truths, even those hidden from mortal eyes." Something flickered across Menkara's face, surprise perhaps, at her boldness. Then his expression hardened once more. "Indeed they do. We shall see whose truth prevails." The search lasted hours. Every dwelling was examined, every Posaib hiding place investigated. The nomads watched in silent disapproval as their belongings were scattered, their privacy violated. Through it all, Nayat remained outwardly calm, going about her daily tasks with Amenheru as her silent shadow. By sunset, the soldiers had found nothing. Menkara, his frustration evident in the tight set of his mouth, ordered his men to make camp nearby. They would continue their search of the surrounding desert at first light. That night, as the settlement settled into an uneasy quiet, Nayat and Amenheru spoke in whispers inside her tent. "How did you know it would work?" he asked, wiping the dark ointment from his face. "That he wouldn't recognize me?" "I didn't," she admitted. "But Menkara sees what he expects to see. A prince, not a mute desert dweller." His arrogance blinded him to what was before his eyes. Amenheru shook his head in wonder. "You showed more courage facing him than many warriors I've known." "Fear and courage often share the same heartbeat," she said, an old saying from her people. "But we aren't safe yet. They'll return tomorrow, perhaps with reinforcements." The unspoken question hung between them. What next? They had survived today's danger through quick thinking and good fortune, but such luck could not hold indefinitely. Sooner or later, Menkara would discover the truth. Outside, the desert wind whispered secrets to the sand, carrying with it the distant howl of jackals. Inside the tent, two souls from different worlds clung to a moment of respite, knowing that with dawn would come decisions that could not be undone. For now, they had this stolen night, a breath between heartbeats, a pause in the relentless march of fate. Tomorrow would demand its due, but tonight, in the soft darkness of Nayat's tent, surrounded by the scent of healing herbs and the subtle warmth of each other's presence, they allowed themselves to believe in the possibility of escape. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. The sky brightened from indigo to pale blue as Nayat stirred, her sleep having been fitful at best. Beside her, Amenheru sat in silent meditation, his profile outlined against the tent wall. He hadn't slept at all. "They're still out there," he said without turning. "I can hear them preparing to resume the search." Nayet moved to his side, peering through a small gap in the tent flap. Indeed, Menkara's men were breaking camp, organizing themselves into search parties. The priest himself stood apart, his face turned toward the vast desert as if communing with unseen forces. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now, while they're distracted." Amenheru's hand found hers in the dim light, his touch sending that now familiar warmth through her veins. "Nayet," he said, his voice heavy with resolve. "There's something you need to know before we go any further." The seriousness in his tone made her heart stutter. She sat back on her heels, giving him her full attention. "I've let you risk everything for me without knowing the full truth," he continued, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "You deserve to know who you're protecting." Nayet held her breath, sensing that whatever came next would change everything between them. "My name is Amenheru, son of Pharaoh Seti, rightful heir to the throne of Upper and Lower Egypt." He spoke quietly, but with the undeniable authority of one born to command. "The man hunting me, Menkara, serves the temple of Amun, which seeks to control the throne through my arranged marriage to the high priest's daughter." Though part of her had suspected something of this magnitude, hearing the truth spoken aloud still hit Nayet like a physical blow. She withdrew her hand from his, needing space to process what she'd just heard. "You're the Prince Pharaoh," she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "The one whose coronation was to take place at the last full moon." "Yes." He seemed to brace himself for her reaction. "I fled rather than become a puppet king, slowly poisoned into compliance while the priests ruled through my wife." Nayet's mind raced, connecting pieces that had puzzled her. His educated speech, his bearing, the quality of his dagger, the persistent nightmares about betrayal and duty. Most of all, the intensity of the search. They weren't hunting a simple thief or even a high-ranking official. They were hunting the future god-king of Egypt. "Why tell me now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Because what happens next must be your choice, made with full knowledge." His expression softened, vulnerability breaking through his regal composure. "You've already risked more than anyone should for a stranger. I won't let you risk more for me without understanding what it means." A noise outside. The approaching footsteps of soldiers interrupted them. Nayet motioned for silence, her heart pounding, as the steps paused near their tent. "Check again," came Menkara's cold voice. "The healer knows more than she admits." "Yes, Great One," replied a soldier. Thinking quickly, Nayet grabbed her medicine basket and thrust it into Amenheru's hands. "Follow me," she whispered. "Keep your head down. We're gathering herbs, nothing more." They slipped out the back of the tent just as soldiers approached the front entrance. Nayet led them through the settlement at an unhurried pace, nodding to fellow nomads who watched with worried eyes. No one spoke. No one needed to. The desert people protected their own. At the edge of the settlement, Nayet paused beside the goat pens, pretending to examine a scraggly plant growing in the shade of a rock. From here, she could see Menkara standing atop a small rise, surveying the area with predatory focus. "We won't make it past them," Amenheru murmured. "Not in daylight." "We don't need to," Nayet replied. "Not yet. First, we need them to look elsewhere." She led him to a small cave used for storing grain during the rainy season. Inside, cool darkness enveloped them, the familiar smells of earth and dried herbs providing a strange comfort. "We'll stay here until nightfall," she explained. "Meanwhile, I've arranged a distraction." As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the far side of the settlement. Shouts rang out, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats. Through the cave entrance, they glimpsed riders, young men from the settlement, galloping away in different directions, each wrapped in similar cloaks. "Decoys," Amenheru realized, admiration clear in his voice. "Jabari's sons and nephews," Nayet confirmed. "They'll lead the soldiers on a chase across the dunes, giving us time to plan our next move." The strategy worked. Within minutes, most of Menkara's men had mounted and given chase, splitting into groups to pursue the different riders. Only the priest and a small personal guard remained behind. In the relative safety of the cave, Nayet finally allowed herself to fully confront what Amenheru had revealed. She studied him in the dim light filtering through the entrance, not as her patient now, but as Egypt's rightful ruler. "Why did you choose to tell me?" she asked again. "You could have kept your identity hidden even from me." Amenheru moved closer, his face half illuminated, half in shadow. Because from the moment you pulled me from the sand, you've shown me something I've rarely encountered in my life. Truth. No masks, no hidden agendas, no court games. His voice dropped lower, and because I couldn't bear to lie to you any longer. The sincerity in his words touched something deep within her, a place she'd kept carefully guarded since losing her parents. Being alone had been easier than risking that kind of pain again. Yet somehow this man, this pharaoh, had slipped past her defenses. "What will you do?" she asked. "If you escape Menkaure, where will you go?" "To the Delta region first," he answered. "I have allies there, generals loyal to my father rather than the temple. With their support I can return to Thebes and claim my throne before the priests install another puppet in my place." Nayet absorbed this, understanding the implications. If he succeeded, he would be Pharaoh, God King of Egypt, ruler of the two lands, living embodiment of Horus on earth, a being so far above a simple desert healer that the gulf between them would be immeasurable. And if you fail? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "If I fail," he said quietly, "at least I will have lived true to myself for these few precious weeks." His hand found hers in the shadows, fingers intertwining. Neither spoke the words forming in their hearts. What was the point when reality stood immovable as the great pyramids between them? Hours passed in that cool darkness, the sounds of the settlement filtering in from outside, life continuing, despite the disruption of soldiers and searches. They spoke in low voices, sharing stories, beliefs, hopes. It was a strange bubble of intimacy, all the more precious for its inevitable brevity. As afternoon waned toward evening, footsteps approached the cave. They tensed, Amenheru moving protectively in front of Nayet, but it was only Sati, the elder's wife, carrying a bundle of food and water. "The priest has questioned everyone," she reported, setting down her offerings. "He grows increasingly frustrated. 3 of the decoy riders have returned safely by different routes, having lost their pursuers in the dunes. The others will be back by nightfall." "And Menkaure?" Nayet asked. Sati's weathered face creased with displeasure. "He performs rituals outside the settlement, consulting with his gods. The remaining soldiers maintain a perimeter, but their attention is divided." After the older woman departed, Amenheru turned to Nayet, his expression troubled. "Menkaure's rituals are no mere show of piety. He's a powerful magician trained in the secret rites of Amun. If he's consulting the gods, you think he'll discover your presence?" "Not precisely, but he may receive guidance that leads him back here." He paced the small space, tension evident in every line of his body. "We should leave as soon as darkness falls. Every moment we delay increases the risk." Nayet began gathering their few supplies, her mind racing ahead to what they would need for a journey across the desert. So focused was she on practical matters that she almost missed Amenheru's next words. "You don't have to come with me." She paused, turning to face him. "What?" "To the Delta," he clarified. "It's not your fight, Nayet. You could return to your people once I'm safely away." The thought hadn't even occurred to her. From the moment she'd decided to help him escape, she'd assumed their paths were now intertwined. The realization that he might leave her behind struck with unexpected force. "Is that what you want?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Amenheru crossed the space between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "What I want," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "is something I have no right to ask for." Their eyes met in the dimming light, and Nayet saw in his gaze everything he couldn't say. Desire, tenderness, regret, a longing that matched her own. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this cave, this man, this heartbeat suspended between one breath and the next. The spell broke at the sound of approaching voices, not friendly this time. Soldiers' boots crunched on the rocky ground outside, coming closer. "In here," commanded a familiar voice that sent ice through Nayet's veins. Menkaure. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in the small cave. They were trapped. Amenheru straightened, his hand going to the knife at his belt. "Stay behind me," he whispered, but Nayet had already stepped forward, placing herself between him and the cave entrance. "Trust me," she murmured, then raised her voice. "Enter, if you seek healing." The priest appeared in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun, his silhouette seeming larger than human. Behind him loomed 2 guards, spears at the ready. "Healer," Menkaure's voice dripped with contempt, "your deception ends now. Where is the fugitive prince?" Nayet adopted the serene manner she used when treating the gravely ill. her hands loose at her sides, her breathing calm despite the fear clawing at her insides. Great One, I treat many who come seeking healing, but no princes have sought my humble skills. Do not play games with me, woman. Menkara stepped closer, his cold eyes scanning the cave. My rituals have revealed that the object of my search remains near. The gods themselves have guided me to this settlement. His gaze fixed on the shadowed form behind her. Who is this? My assistant, Nayat replied, a mute cousin who helps gather herbs. Bring him into the light, Menkara commanded. Nayat felt Amenheru tense behind her, knew he was preparing to fight, a battle he could not win against armed guards. Making a split-second decision, she turned to him, pressing her hand against his chest in a silent plea. Trust me. After a moment's hesitation, Amenheru stepped forward, head bowed, shoulders hunched in the posture of subservience she had taught him. The fading light revealed his disguised face, darkened with the ointment, features deliberately slack as befitted someone simple of mind. Menkara studied him with narrowed eyes. Look at me, he ordered. Nayat's heart seemed to stop as Amenheru slowly raised his gaze. She held her breath, praying to every desert spirit that the priest would not see through their desperate ruse. For an eternal moment, Menkara stared into Amenheru's eyes. Then, remarkably, he looked away, dismissing him as unimportant. My patience wears thin, the priest said to Nayat. The prince is here. I sense his presence. Perhaps your gods speak in riddles, Nayat suggested, her courage bolstered by their narrow escape. Or perhaps what you sense is merely an echo of what once was. Menkara's hand shot out, gripping her throat with surprising strength. Do not mock the divine, desert witch, he hissed. Your primitive healing arts are nothing compared to the power I wield. Behind her, she felt rather than saw Amenheru's coiled tension, ready to spring to her defense. She gave the slightest shake of her head. Not yet. I do not mock, she managed to say, despite the pressure on her throat. I merely suggest that divine messages require careful interpretation. Perhaps what you sense is not the prince's current presence, but the mark he left on this place. Something flickered in Menkara's eyes. Doubt, perhaps. His grip loosened slightly. The energies of healing work in mysterious ways, Nayat continued, sensing an opening. When I treat a patient, something of their essence remains, like footprints in wet sand. Your rituals may be sensing these traces. The priest released her abruptly, turning to consult with one of his guards in hushed tones. Nayat fought the urge to rub her bruised throat, standing tall despite the pain. Finally, Menkara turned back to her. We will continue our search elsewhere, he announced. But know this, healer, if I discover you have lied, your entire settlement will suffer for your betrayal. With that ominous warning, he departed, taking his guards with him. Nayat and Amenheru remained frozen in place until the sound of footsteps faded into the distance. How did you know that would work? Amenheru whispered, his voice filled with awe. I didn't, Nayat admitted, her legs suddenly weak with relief. But I've noticed that men of power often believe what supports their preconceptions. Menkara wants to believe his rituals are infallible. I merely offered him an explanation that preserved that belief. Amenheru shook his head in wonder. You outmaneuvered a high priest of Amun with nothing but words. Words are often the most powerful medicine, she replied with a small smile. But we can't count on them working twice. We need to leave. Tonight. As they gathered their supplies in the deepening twilight, Nayat felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, certainly. They faced a perilous journey across unforgiving terrain with powerful enemies in pursuit. But beneath that fear ran a current of something else, something that felt surprisingly like hope. Whatever lay ahead, whatever obstacles stood in their path, they would face them together. A desert healer and a pharaoh, bound by a connection neither had sought but both now cherished above all else. The night welcomed them as they slipped from the cave, the first stars appearing overhead like scattered jewels against deepening blue. Somewhere in the distance, a jackal called to its mate, a reminder that in the desert, even the most solitary creatures eventually found their counterparts. 3 days into their journey, the eastern horizon lightened with the first hints of dawn. Nayat and Amenheru had traveled under darkness, resting during scorching daylight hours in whatever shade they could find. Shallow caves, lee sides of massive dunes, once even ruins of an ancient way station. Now, as they crested a towering dune, the landscape changed dramatically. In the distance, a thin green line broke the monotony of sand, the first whisper of the Nile Delta, still days away, but visible in the crystalline desert air. We're making good progress, Amenheru said, his voice rough from thirst despite their careful rationing. "Another 3 days and we'll reach the outermost settlements under General Panhesi's control. A man loyal to my father and to me." Nayat nodded, studying the horizon. Something in his tone made her glance at his profile. Outlined against the lightening sky, a shadow had crossed his face that had nothing to do with the landscape. "What troubles you?" she asked softly. "We've evaded Menkara. We have sufficient supplies. The gods have blessed our journey." Amenheru turned to her, his dark eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't immediately name. "They have blessed us indeed," he agreed, "which makes what I must say all the more difficult." A chill settled over Nayat. "Speak plainly," she said, her heart already knowing what was coming. He took her hands in his touch sending that familiar warmth through her despite the dread building in her chest. "You cannot come with me to the Delta," he said, the words clearly painful. "The path I must walk from here leads into danger greater than anything we've faced together." "I'm not afraid of danger," Nayat replied steadily. "I've proven that, haven't I?" "You have proven yourself more courageous than most warriors I've commanded," he said, thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "But this isn't about your courage, Nayat. It's about what awaits in Thebes." He released her hands and turned away, gazing toward the distant green line that represented civilization, power, duty, everything he had fled from and now must return to. "I am the rightful pharaoh," he continued. "When I reclaim my throne, I must be the divine ruler my people expect, the king my father raised me to be. That means making a political marriage," Nayat finished, the reality she had avoided now unavoidable. "Taking a queen who strengthens your position." Amenheru's shoulders tensed, then slumped. "Yes," he admitted, "though not Neferet. I won't allow the temple that control, but a royal marriage will be expected, demanded by tradition and political necessity." The unspoken truth hung between them. A desert healer could never be that queen. The nobility would never accept her. The priests would use her common birth to undermine Amenheru's authority. "I understand," Nayat said, and she did. She had always known their paths must eventually diverge. The pain came not from surprise, but from knowing the moment had arrived sooner than her heart was prepared for. "Do you?" He turned back, his expression raw with emotion he no longer disguised. "Because I'm not certain I do. These past weeks with you have shown me a different kind of life, a different kind of..." He hesitated, then spoke the word they had both carefully avoided. "Love." The word hung in the air between them, precious and painful in equal measure. "In my world," he continued, "marriages are alliances, not unions of the heart. Children are heirs, not expressions of love. Power is the currency, not happiness." His voice caught. "Until I met you, I never questioned whether there could be another way." Nayat stepped closer, placing her palm against his cheek. His skin was warm despite the cool morning air, familiar now in a way that made her chest ache with longing. "There is another way," she said gently, "but not for Egypt's pharaoh. Your duty is to your people first. The man I've come to know would never shirk that responsibility, no matter the personal cost." Amenheru covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press his lips against her palm, a gesture of such tenderness that Nayat felt tears spring to her eyes. "If I were just a man," he whispered, "and not heir to the oldest throne on earth, I would spend my life at your side, learning your healing arts, listening to Jabari's stories by firelight, watching the desert stars wheel overhead night after night." The vision he painted was so vivid that for a moment Nayat could almost believe it possible, but reality reasserted itself as the sun broke over the horizon, bathing them in golden light. "If you were just a man," she replied, "you wouldn't be the person I've come to care for so deeply. Your sense of duty, your commitment to justice, your willingness to risk everything for what you believe is right, these are as much a part of you as your royal blood." She stepped back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional gulf widening between them. "You must reclaim your throne, Amenheru. Egypt needs a pharaoh who cares more for his people than for power." "And what of you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Nayat gazed over the vast desert behind them. "I will return to my people," she said simply. "They need their healer, especially with Menkara's threats hanging over them." Amenheru's expression tightened with concern. "The priest is dangerous. If he suspects your role in my escape, he won't find me," Nayat assured him. "My people have survived in these sands for generations, disappearing like moisture into the air when danger approaches." They stood in silence as the sun rose higher. Finally, Amenheru reached into his robe and withdrew something that glinted in the morning light, a small golden ankh, the symbol of life, suspended on a simple leather cord. "This was my mother's," he said, holding it out to her. "She gave it to me before she passed into the western lands, telling me it would protect my ka, my life force. I want you to have it." Nayat hesitated, understanding the significance. "I cannot take something so precious." "Please," he interrupted, his eyes intense. "If I cannot give you the future we might have shared, let me at least give you this token of what might have been." Unable to refuse such a heartfelt request, Nayat bowed her head, allowing him to place the cord around her neck. The ankh settled against her skin, still warm from his body. "I have nothing of equal value to give in return," she said softly. Amenheru's smile held more sadness than joy. "You've already given me more than I had any right to expect. Healing, protection, wisdom." His voice dropped to a whisper, "and a glimpse of a life I didn't know I wanted until it was too late." The sun continued its ascent, their shadows shortening beneath them. The time had come. Any longer delay would only make the parting more painful. "You should travel northeast from here," Nayat said, forcing practicality into her voice. "Follow the line of acacia trees that marks the old caravan route. It will lead you to a small tributary of the Nile within 2 days." Amenheru nodded, his eyes memorizing her face. "And you? Which way will you go?" "South and west," she replied. "Back toward the deep desert. There are hidden waterways known only to my people." The moment stretched between them, neither willing to be the first to turn away. Finally, Nayat squared her shoulders and spoke the formal blessing of her tribe. "May the desert winds guide your path. May the stars light your way in darkness, and may the spirits of your ancestors walk beside you until we meet again in this life or the next." Amenheru bowed his head, accepting the blessing. Then, in a movement too swift for her to anticipate, he closed the distance between them and captured her lips with his. The kiss was everything Nayat had secretly imagined. Tender yet passionate, gentle yet urgent. A beginning and an ending contained in a single moment. Her hands found his shoulders, his arms encircled her waist, and for a breathless eternity, the world beyond their embrace ceased to exist. When they finally parted, Nayat saw that Amenheru's cheeks were wet with tears that matched her own. Without a word, he pressed his forehead against hers, their breath mingling. "This is not our ending," he whispered fiercely. "I don't know how or when, but I will find a way back to you, Nayat of the desert." Before she could respond, before her resolve could weaken further, he released her and turned away, starting down the dune toward the distant green line of the delta. Nayat watched his retreating figure, her fingers clutching the ankh at her throat, her heart simultaneously fuller and emptier than it had ever been. Only when his silhouette had disappeared did she allow herself a single sob before regaining control. She was Nayat, healer of the desert people. She had survived sandstorms and scorpions, drought and disease. She would survive this too. Rising to her feet, she turned toward the deeper desert and her waiting tribe. Each step away from Amenheru felt like walking against a powerful current, but she continued on, her shadow stretching behind her like a physical manifestation of her longing. The golden ankh bounced gently against her skin with each step, a tangible reminder of what had been and what could never be. Yet as the distance between them grew, Nayat found strange comfort in knowing that somewhere beneath the same vast sky, Amenheru carried memories of their time together, memories that neither duty nor distance could erase. Behind her, the wind began to erase her footprints, as if the desert itself understood the need to protect their story. Ahead, the endless dunes stretched toward the horizon, their eternal shifting a reminder that nothing, not even separation, lasted forever. And deep within her heart, despite all reason, a small flame of hope continued to burn. Hope that somewhere in the uncertain future, their paths might cross again in a world more forgiving of impossible loves. The great city of Thebes rose like a mirage from the lush banks of the Nile, its white limestone temples and palaces gleaming in the midday sun. Massive stone pylons marked the entrance to the temple of Amun, their surfaces covered with intricate hieroglyphs celebrating the glory of the gods and the pharaohs who served them. Obelisks pierced the cloudless blue sky, their gold-capped peaks catching the sunlight and casting it back in brilliant flashes that could be seen for miles. To the common people crowding the streets, the royal procession making its way toward the palace was a cause for celebration. Their rightful pharaoh had returned after a mysterious absence, alive and well, despite rumors of assassination, kidnapping, or divine punishment that had spread like wildfire through the kingdom. "Hail Amenheru, son of Ra, beloved of Amun!" they cried, casting lotus blossoms and palm fronds before the royal chariot. "Living god of the two lands!" From his position in the golden chariot, Amenheru acknowledged their adoration with practiced gestures, his face a careful mask of divine serenity. Gone were the simple desert robes, replaced by the traditional regalia of Egypt's ruler, pleated kilt of the finest linen, broad jeweled collar, ceremonial false beard, and the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt resting heavy upon his brow. Beside him stood General Panhesi, commander of the northern armies and, as it had turned out, leader of a substantial faction of nobles and military men who had grown increasingly concerned by the temple's grab for power during Amenheru's absence. "The people rejoice at your return, Divine One," the general observed, his scarred face betraying no emotion, though his eyes remained vigilant, scanning the crowds for any sign of threat. "Word of your triumph over the temple's treachery has spread throughout the two lands." Indeed, Amenheru's return to Thebes had been swift and decisive once he'd reached the Delta region. General Panhesi's forces, combined with loyalist factions within the city itself, had secured the palace and key temples, while Amenheru presented himself to the people as their rightful ruler. Menkaura and several other high-ranking priests had been arrested on charges of treason, though the sumo priest Amenhotep himself had mysteriously disappeared the night before Amenheru's arrival. "They rejoice because they know not the cost," Amenheru replied softly, for the general's ears alone, "nor the battles that still lie ahead." For despite the cheering crowds and the seemingly smooth transition of power, Amenheru was under no illusions about the precariousness of his position. The Temple of Amun controlled vast resources and commanded the devotion of the common people. Many nobles who had pledged loyalty did so only from fear or opportunism, their true allegiances still uncertain. And beyond these practical concerns lurked a deeper, more personal struggle, one Amenheru had not anticipated when he'd made the painful decision to leave Nayet behind at the edge of the desert. The chariot passed through massive gates into the palace compound, leaving the noise of the crowd behind. Here, in the relative privacy of the royal residence, Amenheru allowed his shoulders to slump slightly, the weight of the double crown seeming to increase with each passing moment. "You should rest, Divine One," Panhesi suggested, as servants rushed forward to assist their pharaoh. "The coronation ceremony is still 3 days hence. There will be time enough for matters of state after you have recovered from your journey." Amenheru nodded, allowing himself to be escorted to the royal apartments, but rest, when it came, proved elusive. The chambers that had once been his refuge now felt alien, too large, too ornate, too empty. He dismissed the attendants who hovered anxiously, wanting only solitude. Moving to the balcony that overlooked the palace gardens, he removed the heavy crown and placed it on a nearby table, rubbing his temples where the metal had pressed against his skin. The Nile flowed beyond the gardens, its waters reflecting the late afternoon sun in shimmering patterns. Somewhere far beyond that life-giving river lay the vast desert, and somewhere in that desert was a simple healer, with knowing eyes and gentle hands, who had saved more than just his physical body. "Nayet," he whispered, the name a prayer and a lament wrapped in a single breath. How strange that here, surrounded by every luxury, attended by hundreds of servants ready to fulfill his slightest whim, he felt more alone than he had in a small tent, with only her quiet presence for company. How ironic that now, having regained all the power and position he had been born to wield, he found himself longing for the simplicity of desert nights spent in conversation with a woman who saw him not as a living god, but simply as a man. A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted his reverie. "Enter," he called, straightening his posture, schooling his features back into the impassive expression expected of Egypt's divine ruler. An elderly scribe appeared, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the polished stone floor. "Divine One, forgive the intrusion, but the council awaits your pleasure in the Hall of Columns." Amenheru suppressed a sigh. The council, composed of high-ranking nobles, military leaders, and the remaining temple officials deemed loyal, had been formed to help stabilize the kingdom in the wake of the recent upheaval. Their advice was valuable, their support necessary, but their endless debates and political maneuverings exhausted him in ways that the desert's physical hardships never had. "Tell them I shall join them shortly," he instructed, replacing the crown upon his head with practiced ease despite its weight. The scribe bowed again and backed from the room. Alone once more, Amenheru allowed himself a final moment of weakness, touching the space at his throat where his mother's ankh had once rested, the ankh he had given to Nile as a token of what could never be. "Grant me strength," he murmured, though whether he addressed his royal ancestors or the desert healer who had claimed a piece of his heart, he could not have said. The Hall of Columns lived up to its name. Massive stone pillars carved to resemble bundled papyrus plants rose toward the distant ceiling, their surfaces covered in vibrant paint, depicting scenes of pharaohs communing with the gods. Between them, at the far end of the hall, stood the throne of Egypt, a masterpiece of gold and precious stones that symbolized the pharaoh's divine right to rule. As Amenheru entered, the assembled counselors bowed deeply. He acknowledged them with a slight nod, taking his place upon the throne with a grace that belied the turmoil within. "Rise," he commanded, his voice echoing in the vast space. "What matters require our attention today?" It was Rekhmir, an elderly vizier who had served Amenheru's father faithfully for decades, who spoke first. "Divine One, there are 3 pressing concerns before the council. First, the matter of the temple's reorganization now that the treasonous elements have been removed." Amenheru nodded. The Temple of Amun, while guilty of overreaching its authority, remained essential to Egypt's spiritual and practical governance. A delicate balance would need to be restored. "Second," Rekhmir continued, "reports from our southern borders indicate unusual movement among the Nubian tribes. Nothing alarming as yet, but worthy of attention given the kingdom's recent instability." Another concern to be addressed, though Amenheru suspected the Nubians were simply testing for weakness in the wake of his disappearance and return. "And finally," here the vizier's voice took on a different tone, "the matter of the royal succession and the necessity of selecting a queen consort before the coronation ceremony." And there it was, the issue Amenheru had been dreading since his return to Thebes. He kept his expression neutral, despite the sudden constriction in his chest. "The council has prepared a list of suitable candidates," Rekhmir continued, gesturing to a younger scribe who stepped forward with a papyrus scroll. "Daughters of noble houses, foreign princesses whose unions would secure valuable alliances, priestesses of appropriate lineage." "Enough," Amenheru interrupted, his tone sharper than intended. Moderating his voice, he continued, "We understand the council's concern for the succession. However, the selection of a queen consort is the pharaoh's prerogative, not a matter for public debate." A murmur ran through the assembled counselors. Rekhmir bowed slightly, his wrinkled face carefully expressionless, though his eyes reflected concern. "Of course, Divine One. We merely seek to assist in this most important decision." "Your assistance is noted," Amenheru replied coolly. "We will consider the matter privately. For now, let us focus on the other issues before us." The remainder of the council meeting passed in a blur of reports, proposals, and subtle political maneuvering. Amenheru participated with the authority expected of him, making decisions, issuing commands, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics with the skill he had been taught since childhood. But a part of his mind remained distant, transported back to simpler conversations under desert stars, where words meant exactly what they said, and the only politics were those of the heart. Later, as the sun set over Thebes in a blaze of orange and crimson, Amenheru found himself once again on the royal balcony, gazing not at the spectacular view, but at a simple object in his palm, a small pouch of woven desert grass containing dried herbs, their scent faintly reminiscent of Nayet's healing tent. He had found it tucked among his belongings upon returning to the palace, a silent token she must have slipped into his pack before their parting. The discovery had nearly undone him, bringing back with vivid clarity the moment of their separation, the kiss that had tasted of both beginning and ending, the fierce promise he had made to find his way back to her somehow. "A promise I have no idea how to keep," he murmured, closing his fingers around the small pouch. For what future could there possibly be for them? Even if he defied tradition and named a common desert healer as his queen, the resulting political chaos would undermine his authority just when Egypt needed stable leadership most. The nobles would be outraged, the priests scandalized, the common people confused by such a dramatic break with tradition. And what of Nayet herself? Would she even want the gilded cage of royal life, bound by protocols and expectations so different from her free existence among the dunes? Would the woman who had saved him, challenged him, and ultimately changed him, be happy in the formal constraints of the pharaoh's court? A memory surfaced, Nayet kneeling beside him in her tent, her capable hands preparing a healing poultice, her voice matter-of-fact as she explained the properties of each herb. "The desert teaches patience," she had told him. "Seeds lie dormant in the sand for years, waiting for the perfect moment to bloom. Sometimes, what seems impossible simply requires the right conditions." Amenheru straightened, a new resolve forming within him. Perhaps like those desert seeds, his promise to Nayet needed only time and the right conditions to flourish. He was Pharaoh of Egypt, after all. His word was law, his authority divine. If he could not change tradition in one sweeping gesture, perhaps he could plant the seeds of change that would, with careful tending, eventually create a path for their reunion. But first, he would need to secure his position beyond any challenge. That meant dealing decisively with the remaining threats to his rule, establishing his authority as both political leader and divine intermediary, and yes, making diplomatic alliances that strengthened Egypt's position, none of which would be easy, none of which would happen quickly, and all of which would require him to set aside his personal desires for the greater good of his kingdom. Yet even as he acknowledged these harsh realities, the small flame of hope that had ignited in his heart refused to be extinguished. Somewhere in the vast desert, Nayet carried his mother's ankh, a physical connection between them despite the distance. And here in Thebes, he carried her memory, her wisdom, and the subtle imprint she had left upon his soul. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that would soon shine over Nayet's desert camp, Amenheru made a silent vow. He would be the pharaoh Egypt needed, just, strong and wise. He would restore balance between crown and temple, secure the kingdom's borders, and ensure prosperity for his people. But in the quiet moments between public duties, in the privacy of his own thoughts, he would continue to seek a way to honor the promise he had made at the edge of the desert to the woman who had saved more than just his life. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with obstacles and uncertainties, but if his time in the desert had taught him anything, it was that even the harshest landscape could, under the right conditions, reveal unexpected treasures. And what treasure could be more precious than finding a way to reunite with the woman who had shown him a different kind of strength, a different kind of wisdom, and a different kind of love than any he had known within the gilded walls of power? Dawn broke over Thebes like a divine blessing, golden rays illuminating the city in a radiance befitting the momentous day. From every corner of the kingdom, people had journeyed to witness the official coronation of Pharaoh Amenheru, their divine ruler, whose mysterious disappearance and triumphant return had already become the stuff of legend. Streets overflowed with humanity. Noblemen in their finest linens walked alongside farmers and craftsmen who had traveled for days to be present. Vendors called out their wares, while children darted between the legs of adults, their excitement palpable in the air. Inside the palace, a different kind of chaos reigned. Servants scurried through corridors carrying ceremonial objects, priests rehearsed sacred chants, and officials barked orders as the complex machinery of royal protocol whirred into motion. In his private chambers, Amenheru stood perfectly still as attendants completed his transformation from man to living god. Layer by layer, they dressed him in garments that seemed to capture light itself, pleated gold-threaded linen, jewel-encrusted ceremonial breastplate, armlets of solid gold depicting protective deities. "The people say the gods themselves have blessed this day, Divine One," remarked the chief attendant as he fastened the royal bull's tail to Amenheru's belt. "Not a cloud in the sky, and the Nile rises perfectly." Amenheru merely nodded, his thoughts elsewhere despite the momentous occasion. 3 months had passed since his return to Thebes, 3 months of consolidating power, appointing loyal officials, reforming the temple hierarchy, 3 months of sleeping in a palatial bedroom that nonetheless felt emptier than a simple desert tent. "It is time, Divine One," announced Rekhmir from the doorway. The elderly vizier had proven himself invaluable during the transition. The procession wound through the palace to the sacred bark that would carry Amenheru to the temple of Amun. Carried on the shoulders of 24 priests, the golden vessel emerged from the palace gates into the sunlight, where thousands of waiting subjects fell to their knees. "Hail Amenheru, beloved of Amun, son of Ra, lord of the two lands!" The cries rose like incense to the heavens. From his elevated position, Amenheru could see the entire city spread before him. All this was his domain, his responsibility, his sacred duty. The weight of it should have filled him with pride, with a sense of divine purpose. Instead, his thoughts drifted to a simpler landscape. endless dunes under star-filled skies, and a pair of dark eyes that had seen him not as a god, but as a man. Nayat, are you safe? Do you ever think of me as I think of you? At the temple, the newly appointed high priest Naktu, a moderate chosen specifically for his scholarly nature rather than political ambition, waited to receive the pharaoh. What followed was ancient and immutable, a ceremony that had changed little since the first dynasties. In the Holy of Holies, before the massive statue of Amun-Ra, Amenheru received the divine confirmation of his rule, anointed with sacred oils, the double crown placed upon his head. Behold Amenheru, living Horus, son of Ra, chosen of Amun, divine ruler of the two lands, intoned Naktu. May your reign bring Ma'at, truth, justice, and cosmic balance to all Egypt. By sunset, as the coronation feast began in the great courtyard of the palace, Amenheru's face ached from maintaining the serene expression expected of Egypt's divine ruler. Long tables laden with every delicacy stretched across the courtyard. Nobles vied for positions closest to the royal dais, where Amenheru sat alone upon his elevated throne. Wine flowed freely, musicians played, dancers performed. Yet beneath the celebration ran an undercurrent of tension, a question unspoken but present in every glance toward the solitary figure of the pharaoh. It was Rekhmir who finally gave voice to what all were thinking, approaching the throne during a momentary lull in the festivities. "Divine One," the vizier began, his voice pitched for Amenheru's ears alone. "Tradition dictates that a pharaoh announce his chosen queen during coronation festivities." Amenheru's face revealed nothing, though internally he had been bracing for this moment. "We are aware of tradition, Vizier Rekhmir. The people expect it, Divine One. The succession must be secured." The elderly man's eyes held genuine concern. "Without an announced betrothal, rumors will spread. Factions may form around potential candidates." "Enough!" Amenheru raised a hand. He had spent many sleepless nights contemplating his response, weighing duty against desire, tradition against the vision of a different path. Rising from his throne, Amenheru moved to the edge of the dais. Sensing something momentous, the courtyard gradually fell silent, all eyes turning toward their pharaoh. "People of Egypt," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly. "On this sacred day, the gods have confirmed our divine right to rule the two lands, to maintain Ma'at, to ensure prosperity and protection for all. In our absence from Thebes, we journeyed far, guided by the hand of Amun himself. In the harsh embrace of the desert, where life and death hang in perfect balance, we gained wisdom that will guide our reign." Amenheru paused, scanning the expectant faces before him. "It is tradition that on this day we announce our choice of queen, she who will stand beside the throne, who will bear the next divine ruler, who will ensure the continuation of our divine lineage." The crowd leaned forward collectively, nobles and officials exchanging glances. Several prominent families had been positioning their daughters for months. "Tradition is the foundation upon which Egypt's greatness stands," Amenheru continued. "Yet even the mightiest pyramid began as a single stone laid with purpose and vision. During our journey, when the desert sun had nearly claimed our life, we were saved by one whose wisdom and courage match any in this court, a healer whose hands carry the blessing of the gods themselves." Rekhmir stepped forward, alarm evident in his expression, but Amenheru continued. "We declare today that we will take no queen chosen for political advantage, no daughter of nobility whose bloodline is her only qualification, no foreign princess to secure an alliance that could be broken with her death." The courtyard erupted in shocked murmurs. Such a declaration was unprecedented, a direct challenge to centuries of royal tradition. Instead, Amenheru's voice rose above the growing tumult. "We will send a royal delegation to the western desert to bring before this court the woman who saved not just our life, but our understanding of what it means to rule with wisdom and compassion rather than mere power." Complete silence fell, so profound that the distant sounds of the city seemed suddenly intrusive. "Her name is Nayet," Amenheru continued, the name feeling like a prayer on his lips. "A healer of the desert people, whose lineage may not be royal by birth, but whose spirit carries nobility beyond any I have encountered in these palace walls." The shock on the faces before him transformed into expressions ranging from outrage to disbelief to calculation. "Divine One," Rekhmir found his voice at last, stepping closer to the throne, his words an urgent whisper. "This is unprecedented. The priests, the nobles, the people themselves expect They expect a pharaoh who embodies divine will, Amenheru interrupted, pitching his voice for all to hear. And it is our divine will that Egypt's next queen be chosen not for her bloodline or political connections, but for her wisdom, courage, and heart. Drawing himself to his full height, he assumed the formal pose of Osiris in judgment, right hand holding the crook of authority, left hand the flail of punishment. This is our royal decree, blessed by Amun-Ra himself. Any who would question it questions not a man but a god. The reminder of his divine status effectively terminated any immediate opposition. Even the most powerful nobles and priests would hesitate to openly challenge a newly crowned pharaoh. General Panhesi, Amenheru called, his voice ringing with authority. The battle-scarred commander stepped forward, bowing deeply. Divine One, you will personally lead the delegation to find Nayat of the desert people, 20 of your most trusted men, provisions for a journey of 30 days. You depart at dawn. It shall be done, Divine One. The general bowed again, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes reflected something like approval. The feast continues, Amenheru announced to the still stunned gathering. Let all rejoice in Egypt's prosperity and the blessings of the gods. Throughout the remainder of the feast, he observed the furious whispered conversations, the shocked expressions, the calculating glances. Factions were already forming, those who would support him regardless of his decisions, those who would oppose any break with tradition, and the opportunists waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Yet beneath the concern for the political ramifications of his announcement burned a deeper, more personal fire: hope. For the first time since their painful parting at the edge of the desert, Amenheru had taken concrete action to fulfill his promise to find his way back to Nayat. Whether she would welcome this development, whether she would even agree to leave her people for the golden cage of Thebes, whether the court would ever truly accept a desert healer as their queen, these questions remained unanswered. But the first step had been taken, the first stone of a new pyramid laid with purpose and determination. As the evening stars appeared above the palace courtyard, the same stars that shone over the distant desert where Nayat might at this very moment be tending to her people, Amenheru allowed himself a moment of genuine emotion beneath the mask of divine serenity. I have not forgotten my promise, desert healer. Now we shall see if the gods truly favor impossible loves. Thebes erupted in chaos following Amenheru's declaration. Priests huddled in temples, nobles plotted in mansions, commoners debated in markets. A desert woman as queen, unprecedented. The high priest Naktu, initially stunned, proposed a solution, a divine test. If this Nayat is worthy, let her prove it before all Thebes, he announced. The gods will judge her fitness to stand beside Pharaoh. Amenheru agreed reluctantly. Better a chance than outright rejection. She will face the court's judgment when she arrives. Meanwhile, Panhesi's expedition followed Nayat's trail through the shifting dunes, hoping they weren't too late. General Panhesi found Nayat tending the sick in a remote oasis settlement. His news left her speechless. Pharaoh Amenheru requests your presence in Thebes, he said, bowing respectfully. Clutching the golden ankh at her throat, Nayat hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The journey was arduous. Blazing days, cold nights, and growing apprehension. Each mile brought her closer to a world utterly foreign to her simple life. Will I see him as he truly is, she wondered, or only as Pharaoh, unreachable as the stars? Thebes finally appeared on the horizon, its grandeur overwhelming her desert-trained eyes. The impossible dream was becoming reality. Nayat refused the elaborate gowns offered upon her arrival. Instead, she chose simple white linen, adorned only by Amenheru's ankh. I will face judgment as myself or not at all, she insisted. The great hall fell silent as she entered. Hundreds of eyes, curious, hostile, calculating, followed her progress toward the throne. Amenheru, resplendent in royal regalia, watched her approach with carefully masked emotion. Their eyes met across the formal distance, speaking volumes without words. Though surrounded by opulence beyond imagination, she saw only the man she'd healed in her humble tent. Whispers rippled through the court. A desert savage. How dare she? Such strange dignity. The banquet was battlefield disguised as hospitality. Noble women in jeweled wigs smirked behind painted fans. Men posed questions dripping with condescension. Tell us, dessert woman, how many generations of your family served as royal cupbearers? One asked mockingly. None, Nayat replied calmly. Mine taught healing arts. passing wisdom through generations, serving not one man but many. When asked about governance, she spoke of desert tribes achieving consensus. About wealth, she described sufficiency rather than excess. With each honest answer, she won reluctant respect. "She has strange wisdom," whispered a priest to the high priest. Perhaps the gods truly guided Pharaoh's hand. Dawn broke over the temple of Amun-Ra, where Nayet faced her final test. High priest Naktu led her to the sacred pool, its waters reflecting golden sunlight. "The divine light will reveal truth," he intoned. "If shadows darken your reflection, you are unworthy." Nayet stepped forward, heart pounding. For endless moments, priests studied her reflection in the sacred waters as sunlight streamed through precisely aligned openings. Finally, Naktu raised his arms. "Behold, her reflection shines clear. The gods have spoken. This woman, though born of desert sands, carries light worthy of the throne." Amenheru's controlled expression finally broke into a smile that rivaled the sun's brilliance. Months later, Egypt flourished under Amenheru's rule. The new queen brought unexpected wisdom to court. Compassion tempered with practicality, innovation balanced with respect for tradition. Where nobles once sneered at the desert savage, they now sought her counsel. Her healing knowledge transformed the royal physician's practices, saving countless lives. Dawn found them on the palace's highest terrace, watching the sun rise over Thebes. Nayet, her belly just beginning to show the first signs of the air growing within, leaned against her husband's shoulder. Below them, the city awakened. Merchants setting up stalls, priests heading to morning rituals, children playing in narrow streets. "Do you ever miss the desert?" Amenheru asked, his fingers gently stroking her arm. "Sometimes," she admitted, watching a flock of ibis soar over the Nile. "I miss the silence, the stars that seem close enough to touch, the simplicity." She turned to him, her dark eyes reflecting the golden light. "But home isn't sand or stone. It's where hearts find peace." Amenheru touched the golden ankh that still hung at her throat. "When I gave you this, I hardly dared hope we would be here. Yet here we stand," she smiled, placing his hand on her growing belly, "building something neither of us could have imagined." They had faced resistance, whispers still occasionally echoed through court corridors, but their union had brought unexpected strength to the throne. Amenheru ruled with a newfound wisdom, balancing royal decree with genuine understanding of his people's needs. Nayet had established healing houses throughout Thebes, treating rich and poor alike, their hands intertwined as golden light spilled across the kingdom. A kingdom forever changed, because a healer saved a prince, and together they proved that love could indeed be stronger than the will of gods or men. Two worlds, desert and palace, had merged to create something entirely new and unexpectedly perfect. From scorching sands to glittering palaces, Nayet and Amenheru's love story reminds us that true connection transcends all boundaries. Was your heart racing when they faced impossible odds? Did you feel that bittersweet ache during their separation? These moments celebrate love's triumph over tradition. What was your favorite part of their journey? Would you have risked everything for love like they did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more emotional tales, and check out our previous video about star-crossed lovers. It pairs beautifully with this desert romance. Until next time, remember that the most beautiful love stories often begin in the most unexpected places.